Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Children, Young People and Family Scrutiny panel. Before we start these proceedings, may I please bring your attention to some housekeeping matters. There is no expected fire alarm testing today, and therefore, if the fire alarm does sound, please follow the fire and emergency procedure that are applicable to the Council House. Please, can I also ask that you use your microphone when addressing the meeting, and that is switched off when you are not. And please could you make sure you turn your mobile devices to silent. This meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of subsequent repeated viewing by entering the Warspite room during the meeting. Councillors are consenting to being filmed and to the use of those recordings for webcasting purposes. Item number 1. Jake, do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies received from Councillor Beer. Councillor Sally Nicholson is a substituting. Councillor Gilmore's provided apologies. Councillor Ney is substituting. Councillor Krisanak's provided apologies. Councillor Rainsford is substituting, and further apologies from Councillor Tippett.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 2. Do any councillors have any declarations of interest relating to any items on today's agenda? Thank you very much. If they do come up during the meeting, just raise your hand. Thank you. Moving on to item 3, minutes of the last meeting that took place on the 10th of October. Does the committee agree to the minutes from the last meeting? Can I get a proposer, please? And a seconder? Thank you. Can I have a vote, please, on the minutes? Thank you very much. Moving on to item 4, Chair's urgent business. I don't have any items of urgent business today. So moving on to item 5, education attainment in Plymouth. Please can I hand over to Councillor Creswell to introduce the report to the panel. Thank you. Councillor Creswell.
Good morning, everyone. Right, it gives me great pleasure to introduce this particular report, Education Attainment. This report provides initial and it's unvalidated headline information about how well children in the city achieved in each key stage of education. The report also provides headline information relating to the achievement of our looked after children. As we move through the Christmas period, the greater analysis of the achievement and progress of cohorts of children will in fact be made available. Overall, there is a stable and improving picture across the phases of education in the city. This includes results, in fact, as well for Key Stage 5. So, for example, our early years outcomes for 2024 are slightly improved on the previous year, with 66.7% of children achieving an overall good level of development, and you'll see GLD appear throughout the report, moving closer to a national average of 68% of a good level of development. In addition, the year 1 phonics screening check outcomes remain strong at 81.2%, achieving the standard score, above 2024 national average of 80%, and previous year's city 80%, national 79%. Again, at Key Stage 2, overall results for reading, writing and maths combined are improved on the previous year, and indications are that they will remain above the national benchmark. Similarly, at Key Stage 4, early indications are that Plymouth will draw closer, if not matching, national progress measure benchmarks. I'd like to say at this point about our hard-working staff in schools should be congratulated on their efforts. And that includes as well our children, our young people, because what happens in the classroom is absolutely key. And also as well our school leaders right across in both senior leadership roles and roles in maths, etc., in order, because everyone contributes to these results. For our looked after children, the headline data indicates that we must continue to focus on ensuring that strong individual programmes of support are in place so that each and every child fulfills their potential and progresses to a positive destination. Additional opportunities to strengthen numeracy and literacy skills will be key to ensuring this through high quality personal education plans. And we do look in detail at the progress of our looked after children in corporate parenting as well. Whilst our city results are very encouraging, and I'd hasten to say that they are encouraging, we should not be and we will not be complacent. And there are specific areas for development, such as ensuring children develop the language skills that will provide them with a strong basis for literacy. And these have been identified as priority areas in the place-based plan, and the 6 strands of the place-based plan are actually set out in one of the other reports. And one of the key things there is, in fact, about the work and the research that we are doing as far as early language acquisition skills are concerned. I want to, just coming a little bit off piece here, I want to actually point you in direction of page 26, because in there are good elements showing how children, showing to note in there the work that's happening as far as our disadvantaged children are concerned. And we've identified schools, and they're really varied schools, where some really good work is actually being done in terms of our disadvantaged children, in enabling them to reach their best levels of attainment. And there's a really good place there for sharing good practice. And what I would actually point out, the range of schools there is actually quite varied, which shows that inclusivity and high expectation are not mutually exclusive and can give rise to higher performance. And it's very encouraging that we can see that starting to become very apparent in many of our secondary schools across the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cresswell. Do I have any questions? Councillor Rainsford.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Sally, for that presentation. One of the final points you made was in relation to the range of schools who on page 26, with best practice. What can we do, what can the council do to encourage the sharing of that best practice? What form does it take, given we have a range of different schools here? How do you progress that?
I was just going to say I'll get Jim to put in a bit more detail, but I think what's been very encouraging is we've had some really positive head teacher meetings and engagement with the local authority, and some fantastic projects and specific bits of work that are going on within our schools and multi-academy trusts. And I think there's a real desire in such to actually share that good practice, and that is absolutely essential for moving things forward. And I'm sure that Jim can actually add a bit more detail, in fact, to that.
Jim?
Yeah, I think probably there's 3 strands of how practice is shared in the city. The first is through our place-based plan, where each of our strands involves a range of school leaders from a range of trusts, where they're able to share the practice in their schools, identify practice from across the city and outside, and then we bring that together for models of best practice, which we then disseminate across the city. So that's a real strength. A second way in which best practice is shared is through our own school effectiveness framework. We've recently revamped that, and that will be ratified at the Plymouth Education Board November the 26th. However, we do have strong processes in place currently, and through that process we as officers look across the city where we've identified best practice, and then we contact those schools directly, because we have a number of forums for sharing. For example, Isabel runs the attendance network, we have our Senko briefings, and where we know that practice is strong, we invite them to contribute and we invite them to present. The third actually is outside of us. Trusts do work together directly in the city. Sometimes that, for example, that can be brokered by the Department for Education. Sometimes that's actually an informal arrangement between trusts. So there are those 3 strands for how practice is shared. So that's actually encouraging and strong. And as Sally said, we see that through our head teachers' willingness to engage.
Thank you, Jim. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. I agree. There is a really encouraging picture here. You know, and it's all thanks to those who are driving it and those who are implementing it and seeking it to happen. Going back to what you've said about the early years, the language acquisition skills of early years children. When I visited the school the other day, the COVID inheritance, if you like, is still prevalent. And one of the things they pointed out was that for parents of children who missed early years experience, so they missed the socialising, the learning gains, etc., etc. There's been a focus on those children, but if a parent had their eldest child in that situation and they've subsequently had another child, they haven't had the feeling of what it's like as a parent just when your child starts school, because their older children didn't go through all those stages. So when the work to include early years settings in primary schools comes about, do you envisage that having a benefit on liaison with early years practitioners on site and family support early on to, one, to develop the children's skills, but also to help parents through what they can do when their child is getting ready or starting school?
Thank you.
I will let my officers answer some of that as well, but obviously you've touched on something that this present government has made a great point, that early years is really very much going to be centre stage, and we know that through so much of the research, and we know that this is why it's such an important strand of our place-based provision and programme is the fact of early years acquisition, and we've got some really good work actually going on there, and work that we're hoping to actually develop further. And yes, of course, one of the great advantages of children coming into school, coming into a setting which is a nursery setting, very often perhaps attached to a school, where the curriculum, and I would say this is a professional, where the curriculum is actually guided by professional teachers, is bound to have a positive impact, and also is very much linked as well with a lot of really good working that's going on, which is very much accepted and is acknowledged every time I go into school. It's about our transition work. We tend to think very much about transitions between year 6 to year 7, but actually it's that transition actually into school. And if you actually have good follow-on early years practice, those children have a smooth transition into school, and that means that you actually don't have that sort of slip back. Children transition well and make better progress.
Yeah, there's so much exciting work going on in the city, particularly targeting children who are starting school and may not, and may have struggled through COVID and had experience which hasn't set them up as well as we might have hoped. As a department as well, we have strengthened the way we work with our multi-academy trusts. We now hold trust inclusion meetings, and we cycle through each trust through the academic year, and we get similar feedback from the trusts we meet around how that they are planning to put resource into early years provision to support children as they come through. In terms of our place-based plan, 2 of the strands specifically focus and target this area. One is transitions, which is looking very closely at the transition into school, and the other, as we've mentioned before, is early language acquisition. In terms of the transitions, the exciting piece of work is that we have a transition portal up and running through our Early Years Stronger Practice Hub, which is led by Heidi Price, where we have our settings and our schools working together to ensure all the information, or as much information, is consistently passed between early year settings and schools, and that's absolutely key. That's going through its first year this year, and we will be evaluating in the next autumn term. In addition to that, what we really must do through the strands of the place-based plan is ensure that we link our colleagues in health and the speech and language work that we are doing, that they are doing, with the Stronger Practice Hub, and then back into our family hubs. So you've got that sort of triangle of work which is going on in the city, which will be much stronger if all of those partners are working in harmony. And, and I can say that is happening. So that is how we are focusing, on those areas to make sure those children get absolutely the best start. And in addition to that, We do have the nursery expansion programme, and we do have schools coming forward to us to expand their nursery provision. And I can mention Lara Green, one of our maintained primaries, and others are thinking about St Edwards. We've had a number of schools across the city coming forward to explore that with us.
Thank you, Jim.
Ask a supplementary, please.
You can indeed.
Kind of. That's really good. Can I suggest a couple of other to see if it's worth you doing other examples of sharing? The secondary sharing, the good practice of schools, is that feasible at a primary level? And to share with us, and also whether data is included for different categories of children. Why is there a gap? Why is there no data for service pupils? Because service pupils, and do all schools analyse the provision for service children? Because that is an important area, because it hits the issue of impact of mobility, the impact of how service pupil premium is spent. And whilst it's not directly intended for academic, it's for well-being, which does influence academic achievement. And because of the city we are, having an idea of service pupil achievement and progress would be really good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Lisa?
Yes, absolutely. We'll make sure that we do that. The analysis that happens once we have validated results will be much more detailed, but it gives us that ability at that point then to be able to compare ourselves with both national and statistical neighbours, and we'll make sure that we include service children in that analysis. Thank you.
Just to add to that, through the theme group, Michael House, one of the officers, has recently done an analysis of pupil premium spends, and one of his focus areas is really focusing on the data set around our service children, their progress, attainment and outcomes. So that is absolutely on our radar and in our planning.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Stevens.
Just to start with, and I say I really echo Councillor Stevens' point around service children. Being from a service family myself and knowing there's a large service group of service families in Plymstock, I'm sure they would welcome that. And it was great to also see that Plymstock School is on there as one of the schools with good practice. One of the only things I did notice is there's some schools which are more consistently on there with good practice. I'd be just interested to hear your thoughts on the reasons why some schools are good across the board and why some, are good on specific areas.
Yeah. So the schools included here are the schools which stand out in our early unvalidated headline data. When we come into the validated data where we carry out a more in-depth analysis of the cohorts of children, we'll get a clearer picture on which schools are standing out within that data for practice, and I expect that to expand because there's absolutely loads of good practice within the city. And as you just mentioned, they're kept, service children are one good example. There might be a higher concentration of children in one particular school, so the practice is there versus other schools where there's less. So as you receive, as a committee, the next detailed report, you will get a much clearer picture, but I am confident actually that the number of schools we see will expand as we look into that practice.
Thank you very much, Jim. Is that okay, Councillor Steele?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm looking at the data on page 19. Can I ask why the two pupils at ACE schools are not given assessments? The specific one. Thank you.
It's page 21.
Sorry. 19.
In terms of why the data isn't explored any further in the report, is that? Yeah. We have to be really careful when there's low pupil numbers because you can the individual pupils could potentially be identified, and it's the same with the headline report on the looked after children. We keep the data at headline information in our reports for that basis on that basis. I hope that answers the question. But we do, there's as we come into the alternative provision report later in the meeting, there's a much deeper dive into that group of young people who are at ACE and their achievement.
Thank you, Jim. I'll wait till then to ask my question for that then. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for presenting the data. You know I like data over a 10-year period. It's really important to see the data in the pre-COVID era as well as post-COVID so we can see the comparisons. There's a very clear link, I think, between health, fitness and attainment, which reinforces the need for both quality indoor and outdoor spaces. And we've highlighted the health and importance of health already today. So given we're in a city environment, there is a greater competition for space and an increased risk that some of those playing fields might be built upon. And it's not just playing fields, it's both indoor space for winter as well as outdoor space for summer. So what protections are we providing to ensure that those important outdoor spaces are protected for use by both women and girls, for fitness, for health, for sport, which then directly leads into the educational attainment we have here? And is there a reason why we have consistently, so it's a second question I'm afraid, we've consistently shown that we are behind the national average, but it would appear we're slightly catching up. But clearly there's a national picture and there's the local picture, particularly around boys. Now boys are always behind the national picture and the local picture. So what specifically are we doing to try and help boys catch up with the educational attainment that girls are receiving?
I'll pass some of that over. There is, in your question, there's a bit of a dichotomy there, isn't there? Because actually, boys, the data that we have on boys and the data we have on boys' physical activity is that they are actually more physical, in fact, than girls. And the data actually goes right back to children of recent data, shows even from when they're preschool. But as you know, as you can see, there are boys girls tend to exceed performance academically at school, although they're not quite so physically, perhaps not as physically engaged, not all girls, but that's, so I can't quite see where the question is actually leading, though I think there's a very interesting and something that we are continually looking at and addressing, and not just here in Plymouth, but up and down the country, about how you sort of like, not just about narrowing the gap, but how, you make sure that boys actually achieve well in all subjects, as well as girls as well. So I'll just get you to...
Lisa.
Thank you. So each school or trust will identify based on it will do a deep analysis based on the cohort data that it's had for each year, and it will put in place an action plan in relation to improvements that need to be made, either for the next cohort or more broadly in terms of the curriculum and the teaching and learning in the school or in the trust. When it's a maintained school, we have an officer that supports that work. They go in on a termly basis and help the school to make the improvements that need to be made. We receive reports back on those improvements. Sometimes that will be gender related, sometimes it will be related to other matters, it will be cohort specific. There isn't a Plymouth-wide approach to boys specifically. We've identified the 6 strands that are the top most important strands for place-based leadership of school leadership in the city, and it doesn't include boys. But I'm not saying that doesn't, it doesn't mean that therefore they're not a focus. There'll be a focus at a school or a trust level. In terms of the outdoor and indoor spaces, I don't have a clear answer to give you at this point, other than to say that obviously in many cases the land isn't ours. But I'm happy to take that away and formulate a clearer answer for you if you're happy for me to do that.
Councillor Wood.
Yes, thank you. I probably should have kept the 2 questions quite separate because I've confused matters by answering 2 at the same time. But just hammering down onto the outdoor space and the protection provided to playing fields, and of course the need for provision for good quality indoor space. Our local plan would highlight that there be neighbourhood green space, which would largely make it's a fair amount taken up with playing fields and such at schools. How protected are those playing fields through the local plan, and do we have other means by which we try to protect this outdoor space for children?
Who would like to come in on that? Lisa?
That's what I'm asking to take away and come back to you with an answer on that, if that's okay with you.
I do have a couple of questions myself here, and I think maybe some of them will cross over into the alternative provision. So please do push me on if you need to. The first one is around page 22, where we're talking about phonics attainment rising for year 1, which is great. But then on the next page, we're talking about expressive arts and creative subjects doing really well against potentially English and maths, and that's on page 22. I just wondered, it says that it's going to be a priority for the place-based learning. I wondered how that was going to address that gap, but that might be something I want to ask in the alternative provision also.
I can certainly answer in terms of phonics, which has been a strong performer in terms of that particular assessment in the city. And I think, coming back to Councillor Stevens' questions, that's one of the things we're particularly mindful of, that the early experiences of children starting school, that can have an impact on their literacy and their literacy acquisition through their language skills. So it's going to be that the development of the early language acquisition strand of the plan, which we would expect to see a particular impact. And then one of the things about the primary assessments is that you can then monitor the impact of that through the phonics assessment, and then through the individual strands of the Key Stage 2 assessment, the reading and writing. So there are ways in which we can implement that plan and see the outcomes as well. So I hope that answers part of your question. I'm not sure it answers all of it.
It does. I'm just picking at the creation for young children, the creative mindset, as opposed to the sit down with a pen and a piece of paper and do sums. That's kind of what I was asking.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. When we think about how language is acquired and how literacy skills are acquired, it does start with our earliest foundation stage. It starts with play, and it starts with talking and communication, and all of those things will be reinforced, by our schools through their curriculums, but also through our particular, through that strand in the place-based plan, which will focus on that. So yes, through that early play-based curriculum, that's where a lot of those things will come through.
Thank you very much. That's Councillor Cresp.
If I could just add, I go into schools a lot. And of course, my background is that I was actually a teacher, primary school teacher for 30 years. I have to say that I go into schools who have some very, very creative ways of delivering phonics. And have seen some really outstanding teaching. What you're probably referring to as well is you're referring to the early learning goals, which are the goals that we are assessing children on at the end of the foundation stage. And again, in fact, I was just in a school yesterday in which some very creative ways are seen of developing those early learning goals and making sure that children actually have some of the best opportunities. And again, we know that for all of those areas, language is absolutely central. And the place-based working group and our place-based work identifying early language acquisition skills is absolutely key, and will be key in order to long-term raising the bar right across the school system.
Thank you, Councillor Creswell. That was really good. My second question was it was more of a comment, really. So I note, and I think it's amazing that the equality and equity is rising, as you stated on page 26. It's fantastic, but that gap is still quite big. And for example, we talk about 50% of All Saints students on free school meals. And those, a lot of the children that go to All Saints come from my ward, which is Honecknell. And Honecknell has access to the YMCA. Honecknell has access to the youth service, the community youth centre, which is currently closed, I know, but is there a community kind of cohesion here or something that can be done here to help those deprived areas with two community-based places?
Rather wonderfully, actually, All Saints are opening a new community-based hub to bring the community together around the school. And I'm sure that they would be really pleased to have any councillor visits to that.
I've actually been, and and I was there when a group of parents came in with with children who are actually will be looking at transitioning into year 7 come September, and it's really encouraging to see how they have been working, how they really understand their local communities. And you'll probably know, going right back when it would have been John Kitto, and even before, Burrington has had a very, very strong link with the local community. So many of the children who come in, their parents or even grandparents went to that school, and they're working incredibly hard. And with very much a sort of a shared vision with the local community, which I think is very encouraging. And they would be very keen for people from not just from this scrutiny committee, but I think right across the council to actually go and visit and see the work they're going on. The head there is also someone who's very much involved in working with the local authority with our place-based working group as well.
Thank you, Councillor Cresswell. I am due to go and visit said hub. I just wondered about the connection between the others and that hub. So, for example, the community centre on Honecknell Green does lots of work with young carers, for example. And very similarly, the YMCA has, if you buy a membership for their gym, for example, they give one free to a young person. So I just wondered if these are things that everybody knows about, if we're working together as a group.
Very much so. So first of all, in relation to that trust specifically, they have a post within the trust that is dedicated to the development of community connections. And so I know that that's something that they will be focusing on as part of the development of that hub in that school, is making sure there's good join up. It also links to the work that Martine is doing in children's services in relation to bringing that scaffolding around different communities, bringing in voluntary sector and other partners together. She's starting the first trial of that is in Stonehouse. And then she has 2 others that she wants to move on to after Stonehouse.
That's fabulous. Thank you very much. And look at that, we're right on time. Moving on to item 6, educational attendance in Plymouth. Please can I hand over to Councillor Cresswell to introduce this report. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you, Chair. School attendance is an issue of national focus, and improving the attendance of children to school is a key priority for our city. This paper provides a detailed analysis of school attendance with a particular focus on severe absence. That's pupils with attendance of less than 50%. Children who are on part-time timetables, children who are missing education, and children who move between schools within the academic year. Experience both nationally here in Plymouth has made it clear that simply telling parents about the negative impact that school non-attendance will have on their children has very little impact. And we know that from what we've learnt ourselves from last year. We had a campaign about school attendance, which we thought we were being sensitive and positive, but it didn't actually land well. And we have learnt from that. So we've adopted a much more gentle approach, which is a strong start to the year, which in terms of the early indication shows that that has fallen much better. So instead of messages and actions, it must be about the benefits of community, friendship and new experiences. And put simply, children and families must feel that they belong in school. And that word belonging keeps coming out over and over again. It keeps coming out within this city. It keeps coming out in other authorities up and down the country, which have the same issues as we do. And it's good to see, I think, as well, that the government is using that term about belonging as well. Very important. Therefore, raising school attendance is about understanding and recognising why families choose to keep children away from school, or why children do not feel that they can attend. Both our attendance strategy and place-based plan are designed to tackle the underlying causes that impact on school attendance. The purpose of the wide-ranging data in this report is to support us to target our efforts and understand the most vulnerable children and families who are in danger of missing out the most. And again, it's one of those reports in which that data is really important in order to help us to look forward and find positive solutions and support. But I'm going to end with that word belonging, because belonging is absolutely key to raising attendance as far as our children and families are concerned.
Thank you, Councillor Cresswell. Would anyone else like to add anything to that? No? Do I have any questions, Councillor Stevens?
Thank you. I wonder if you can answer this question, because in the previous item, it wasn't shared that there has been notable success in schools in the west of the city, achieving greater progress and so on. And yet those schools also have struggles with attendance. But presumably those children who struggle with attendance are also included in their assessment data as well. It only shows what's possible if you're in school more. So how you could technically say those schools are improving, but because of poor attendance, they're underachieving in a sense as well. And the second question is, could we have a breakdown of the nature of attendances in school as per the registration code? So why are children, this is for all children, are they absent for medical reasons, illness, hospital, holiday, sport, representation, and things like that, special circumstances? So I'm just in a quandary with the west of the city. Good progress, but weak attendance and the attendance data. Thank you.
Jim?
Could I start with the progress and then Isabel will talk about the codes? Is that okay, Councillor? We've seen some really fantastic movement in the west of the city, which is the part of the city where families can experience disadvantage more prevalently than other parts of the city. I think the thing to note is when you look at the 2019 data, where children were, the progress data at Key Stage 4 indicated that they were achieving pretty much one grade below expectations, that they are now up to a third of a grade below expectations. So again, that plays to your point that the data shows that the improvement is relative compared to all children in the city. And what that tells us is that we've got much further to go with to support children who experience disadvantage to achieve their potential and to receive the right support so that they secure really good outcomes. And that really is the focus of our place-based plan. The overarching theme of the plan, which I know is, I think it's set out in the attainment report, is around mobility. And actually what we see is that children who experience disadvantage are more likely to move schools. That's more likely to affect their school attendance. And we know that because school attendance research tells us that the first weeks of a term are critical in terms of a child's attendance pattern through the rest of the year. And we know that children who are mobile, so they're bouncing between schools, have poor attendance, and within that, you would be fairly safe to say that that the start of the academic year would have been characterised by low attendance as well. So you are absolutely right that we need to make sure that our place-based plan, what the key strand there is our belonging framework, which will look to work in partnership with families around the benefits of school attendance, rather than if you miss so many sessions, you are likely to slip, a grade or half a grade at GCSE in your final outcomes. Because as Councillor Cresswell mentioned, those messages don't land with families well, but what does land with families well, and what the research tells us so far, is messages around how important children are to their school communities, that their teachers care about them, that they are valued, and that if they're not there, actually what they're missing out on is a whole load of fantastic opportunities and friendships. And that's the real shift that we are looking to accelerate within the city, to change that culture around school attendance, because the messages around, if you don't attend, you won't achieve, whilst those are true and factual, they are very ingrained in terms of the messages that are at the forefront, and we need to move those other messages to the forefront now, because we know from looking at work nationally and regionally through the attendance network, which Isabel runs, where we've had other trusts from other parts of the country come to attend to talk to our Plymouth schools around the impact they've seen of their strategies, and our Plymouth schools and trusts share their fantastic work as well. That's how we will change that, and that's equally how we will change that for children who experience disadvantage, where we do have that gap.
Thank you very much, Jim. Councillor Cresswell?
Could I just add to that as well? Because although we have a lot of data and such, I was just making a list here of about being in school, and school is all about relationships. It really is. The relationships you had with your teachers, the relationships that you have with your friends, the relationships you have when you can be in a team, you're part of a class, you're part of a school production, and all of those things. And in a sense, in order to communicate that, it's also the messages that you are really part of and an important part of this school. And if you're not here, we actually all miss you. And I think that's something that we've got the dry data on one side, but on the other side, what we must never forget is that school is actually about relationships and children's achievements. We just know about how children sometimes do particularly well in particular classes and particular teachers because they have such a good relationship with that teacher and also with those other pupils within the class as well.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Wood. Sorry, Isabel.
I was just going to answer the question in respect of attendance and absence codes. So I've done an analysis of that and looked at it against our benchmark data. And what I can see from it is that we're broadly in line with our benchmark, our national and regional, in respect of authorised absence. So that's your medical appointments, all of those authorised illness absence, where we... And actually, I was quite surprised because I thought that we might be higher in terms of our unauthorised holiday rate, but we're not. We're in line with our benchmark comparators. Where we do stand out is our rates of unauthorised absence that aren't necessarily related to unauthorised holidays. So that's something that we are working to understand with our schools as part of our business as usual activities in respect of our regular meetings and our cycle of reporting. So yeah, that's the only difference that I saw. And there was in one of the terms, it was the summer term, at secondary we saw a little bit of a spike in rates of suspension, and then that impacts on rates of absence, because obviously when the children are not in school it counts as an absence, and I did report on exclusions and suspensions at the last scrutiny meeting, so you've got a picture there in terms of what's going on, what we're doing about it. So that's what we see in the data. But if you would like, some graphs to show what I'm looking at my end, then I'm happy to produce that for you.
Yeah, I'd be for all of you for your answers. I would like to see that data. And could we have like a 5-year flow? So we've got a pre-COVID, if it exists, and a no, just to see if there are any notable information that it would be benefited to have. If it shows no change.
So at the moment, I've got 3-year trend data.
I'll go for 3. We'll compromise.
Okay.
Chris can make his own up for the other 7 years, right?
I'm just going to move on to
And one thing, I agree with you about the importance of relationships and being in school, and this is why most parents, when they look at their school report, they go to the back page first to see what has the teacher said about my child, and it's a shame that that bit can't go first before the English, maths, which are equally important, but differently important. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. Within the minutes from the last meeting, to be fair, it's page 6, paragraph H, and then the next bit will be on paragraph N. We highlighted that we work collaboratively with families and monitor children who are home educated, and we supported children who are missing education to return. I've written the wrong piece down. Come back to me.
I'll move on to Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Chair. That's thrown me because I was wasn't expecting to come up then. On this point around the data, I've lost my page. On the severely absent children in section 5, I noticed that it was 35.2% of people who required special educational needs versus 13.8% who have an EHCP. And I just wanted to understand whether, is that double counting? So are some of those, so that's not. So is that also then a positive in terms of saying actually the impact of having the EHCP could be that it actually improves attendance? And obviously we know that the government's really committed to trying and getting the additional resources into special educational needs. So as we get more children with those EHCPs, should we expect to see then that 404 figure drop over time? And then my second question is around I know it's only a small number there, but it's going back to the point around service families. Is there any, do you have any further insight on the reasons why there's severe absences within those service families? Thank you.
I'll turn to Isabel in terms of service families. That first part, I'm just going to turn it on its head slightly and say that actually what we need to be doing is the early intervention and support work at an earlier stage with children and young people who have or may have special educational needs or disability, rather than relying on the panacea of an EHCP, an Education, Health and Care Plan, to have those positive impacts, because we need to support more children and young people at that earlier stage to engage, be able to engage fully in their education and to attain well and to be happy and be able to attend well. So I'm just turning that on its head very slightly. Well, no, fully.
Thank you, Lisa. Isabel?
So with respect to our vulnerable groups, which could include service families, we're always curious with schools around reasons for absence for children that may be marginalised for whatever reason, and that includes service families as well as other cohorts of children. The numbers are low in respect of our service family children who may be severely absent from school. And we're always working with schools to understand what it is that they are doing to in respect of cohorts of children where they're seeing particular patterns. Okay, so just to give you a reassurance that we are curious about that with schools as part of our regular contact, and we are meeting with schools regularly just as part of our business as usual.
Thank you, Isabel. Councillor Ney.
Hello, I'd like to know a bit more about a survey of attendance actually and why people are absent from school. And I was wondering if we could have more detailed reasoning on wards as well, because I was just thinking about secondary education in Southway. We don't have a high school, and the nearest school is 2.8 miles away, and it could be something as basic as cost of living that people aren't getting to school. They don't qualify for bus fares because they're not the 3 mile mark. So I think more of a detailed reasoning, and we could look at and plan how to get people back into school and more inclusivity really. I know that is a problem in my ward, and I know we do have a low attendance in schools in my ward. Thank you.
I've been working with a task and finish group around developing a parent survey to understand the kind of push-pull factors in respect of school attendance. So that will go live on the 15th of January, and it will be we'll publicise it for the city because we want to have a really good sample size in respect of feedback. And then once we have that, we will take that learning to not only inform our attendance campaign, which we're continuing to develop, but also to think about how we might further develop our strategy and approaches for children and for schools, and to get a really detailed understanding of what those barriers are for families where they're experiencing difficulties. Because what the attendance codes don't show you is what the parents are saying about their reason for absence, and we can't know that in every case. So we do need to work in that way where we're surveying parents and really trying to get as much information as we possibly can from them.
Thank you very much. Is that okay, Councillor Nay? And I think, again, the severely absent from school shows vulnerability, deprivation. It's just a running theme in all of them. And how we find a way to work around that and get these young people who are probably very much needing to be in the social setting of a school, the warmth of a school, the food within school, how we get those young people into education. That would be fantastic. Councillor McNamara.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, first of all, given the number of apologies given at the start of this meeting, it's very lucky no one's scrutinising our attendance. But that notwithstanding, of the children missing education, it says 34% because they've moved home. I just wondered how long they have to wait before they are placed in an educational setting on average.
Could you just reference the section on the report that you're referring to so that I can be clear on your question?
Section 21, it says 34% moved to Plymouth from another local authority area or moved address in Plymouth. Is it just a couple of weeks they're waiting for a school play?
Yes, so we do track how long children wait for school places. I could get that data to you if you would like it. I can't answer it off the top of my head, but it can vary. When I was doing the analysis, some children were missing education. A lot of children were missing education for a week or 2 weeks. It was very short. So it depends, because some families will apply for a school place before they move to the city, and therefore that child's entry is really swift because that work has been done in advance. But for other children, the families may need some support to apply for a school place, and then it has to go through the admissions process for allocation, and that's where we see delay. So I can provide a detailed sort of analysis for you, but when I was doing it myself, it ranged between 1 and 16 weeks.
It's quite a long range, isn't it? So I would like to know sort of how many are waiting at the upper end of that range, I think.
That's fine, I can get that for you.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Is that okay, Paul? Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. The attendance survey sounds like a really fantastic thing to do. I think capturing that anecdotal feedback from parents is really important. I was wondering if that could be circulated to members so we can encourage our local teachers to encourage parents to fill that out. On that, I wondered how bullying fits into this larger picture of absence as well. We know that when children don't feel comfortable going into school for bullying, it kind of has a knock-on impact then on their attainment and their overall confidence. And is that something we're seeing reflected in absence? Is there any kind of data we have at this point, or would that come out in the attendance survey?
We would need to collate that through the attendance survey. I think that when we talked through the elective home education report at the last scrutiny meeting, we were able to see that bullying was fairly significant within the reasons for parents electing to home educate, and we know that there is a link between severe absence and elective home education, quite a significant link. But in terms of rates of attendance, I don't have that level of detail, because again, that information would be held anecdotally by schools on a case-by-case basis. So I do think it will be the survey that picks out how prevalent that theme is in terms of the perception of parents or children.
Thank you, Isabel.
Just, it would be very interesting to pick, yes, some of that data out and such. But what might be interesting to know, I don't know if you raised this Councillor McClay, because it is actually anti-bullying week, and I did not know that. It's anti-bullying week, and I was in a school yesterday and a school the day before in which that was very much on the curriculum, being discussed openly. I was in a very frenetic assembly, in fact, which in which was addressing that issue and talking about that issue openly with 6 pupils, and interestingly enough, I don't know if anyone's got odd socks on today, but actually part of anti-bullying week was to wear odd socks. So there are both national campaigns on that, and also there will be in-depth work that's done within schools, and always aware of how that can be a very, very significant issue, and should be something which is never actually ignored.
Thank you, Councillor Creswell. I'm slightly upset now that I've got the same socks on because I always wear odd socks. Councillor Rainsford?
My question is actually about the recording of absences due potentially to domestic violence. Operation Encompass will let schools know if a child has been in a household where there's been an incident or may have been involved in an incident. And if that child isn't in school, there's a pretty fair risk that the reason for the absence is because of the domestic violence. Plus, we have the incident of the court case at the moment where the child was not in school and ultimately, sadly, tragically, she was beaten to death at home. Do we keep specific data on DV and whether or not we think a child is absent, seriously absent because of it?
So at a school level, they may, like normally they would record reasons for absence as sort of supplementary information as part of their case chronology, especially if they had an Encompass call that morning. We don't have that level of detail within the local authority. What we see, the DFE sets the codes, the registration codes, and they're very specific, and there is no registration code for absence because of, that sort of incident happening at home. So it's, that information would be held on a school level basis. But what we would always, schools would always be reasonable in those sorts of circumstances in terms of understanding those reasons for absence and to be supporting those children to return to school. And we would make sure that we were fully supporting the school wherever we can in terms of through their link access and attendance officer. So it's a good, it's an interesting point, but we don't hold that level of information.
Just to add to that, Councillor Rainsford, so when there is domestic abuse within a household where a parent has been removed from the household, it is usually triggered to social services in some way through the police, and the school will know that way because they will tell them. So it will always be known by the educational setting that there has been domestic abuse within the household.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. I've sorted myself out. Paragraph 6H from the minutes, we highlighted that Plymouth worked collaboratively with families and monitored children who were home educated. And then at paragraph N, in response to questions, we highlighted that the local authority was responsible in ensuring there were no children in the city's boundaries missing education, but it was not a requirement for families to provide evidence of their child's home learning. Now, given what we state in 20.1, that a child missing education is a potential indicator of abuse and neglect, increased risk of underachieving, being victims of abuse, being sexually exploited, and becoming not in education, employment or training on reaching school leaving age, just how do we know that the quality of education being received at home is anything close to the level that could be received in school? How do we know that these children are actually receiving what is required and what they deserve to receive?
So we have a session booked in for councillors specifically on elective home education to be able to go through those kind of things in more detail. What's really important to note here is the difference between CME and EHE. A child who is electively home educated is not CME until such point as we as the local authority identify that the education is not sufficient. And having then worked collaboratively with the family, if we still find it to be not sufficient, at that point they will be relabeled as CME, and then the processes for CME will be followed. We have really robust procedures in relation to monitoring our EHE families and education within the boundaries of what we're able to do in the DFE guidance. And that was found to be a really positive area of the last ILACS inspection. But Isabel, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything else. Satisfied?
Yes.
You can.
Thank you, Chair. Second question. It's on Bullying Week and it's on free school meals. Now, when I was at school, yeah, we are going back 30 years, but my junior school, we knew the girl in my class who was on free school meals because she was given a separate card. I can still remember her name. So when she went to go and have something to eat, children of 5 to 10, they don't know why a child has got a pink card to receive free food and we have a green card that we have to pay for. How do we ensure that children are not highlighted that they are at free school meals, and how are they protected from bullying?
I think the really good news, Councillor, is that times have moved on, I'm really pleased to say, and schools do really take that into consideration very carefully. They make sure that there are no obvious differences in terms of the way that children and young people receive their meals or any other additional support that they may be getting. And so I think I'm seeing nods around the room.
I
Jim,
can
did
just
you want to add to
add,
that?
there's electronic systems. So children typically access meals from fingerprints. So then there's no obvious, difference between one child and another.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I just have two questions, if you'll afford me, please. The first one is page 9, 12.0. I do need to come clean here because I talk about part-time timetables all the time, and I've actually got a young person on a part-time timetable this week for her own mental health and well-being, and it got me thinking about it. So I wonder, how do we ensure that that is what's happening, that part-time timetables for the good of the young person is absolutely necessary before we do that?
Schools are expected to complete an assurance form whenever they put a child on a part-time timetable, and that assurance form kind of provides that check and balance that the decision to put a child on a part-time table is part of has been agreed with the multi-agency team. So in your example, you would expect that that child had a professional team around her. So we would always, we're always seeking assurance from schools through their reporting to us that those decisions have been made in collaboration in the best interest of the child, and that there is a plan around that child. And then when we do the follow-up monitoring after 6 weeks, again, we're seeking assurance. We make sure that there's a risk assessment in place, that, and that it's agreed together with the family, with the child, and with the professional team. So that's how we make sure we do our due diligence around the process. Oh, and additionally, sorry, just before I forget, that all part-time timetable information about children is shared with the Education Psychology Service and with the SEND service, so that education psychologists, when they have their planning consultation meetings, can raise children who are on part-time timetables with the SENCO as part of their ongoing discussions and monitoring and support for schools.
Thank you very much. So the worry is the part-time timetable for children who are not behaving the way that school settings would like them to, which moves me on to page 11 and 16.4. I just would like to know, it's a good idea, it's fantastic, meeting with the CEO of each trust on an annual basis for part-time timetables and all of that, but when will we know what the impact of this is? And actually, has there been a meeting at this point, and what is the reason?
So the trust level meetings are obviously more strategic, looking at data overall, but our access and attendance officers, as part of their 6 weekly meetings with schools, will discuss children who are on part-time timetables. Early help link workers are present with those at those meetings, so that they can have joint planning around children. So that it's not that these children are being discussed once a year, there is follow-up and proactive action being taken to make sure that we are supporting schools in planning for children.
Thank you very much, Isabel.
In addition, all of our schools have been RAG rated, so that we pull in the range of data that we have to think about which schools we need to prioritise for support, and they receive more frequent contact from their accident attendance officer as part of our ongoing monitoring and assurance work to support children.
Thank you very much. If there are no more questions, I'm going to move on to item 7, Alternative Provision Assurance Report. Please, can I hand over to Councillor Creswell to introduce the report?
Thank you very much, Chair. All right, alternative provision, or right the way through, you'll probably see it normally written as AP. So by law, children who are permanently excluded from must have education arranged by them, by the local authority, but have education arranged for them by the local authority as soon as possible, and by the 6th day at the latest. This is referred to as Day 6 provision. In Plymouth, Day 6 provision is provided by ACE, which is part of the Transforming Futures Trust. In addition, ACE also provides an education to those children who are too ill to attend school as well. The role of ACE, wherever possible, is to support children to transition back into the mainstream school as quickly as possible. However, for some children where needs are particularly complex, they may transition into special schools, or for some children who join ACE during years 10 and 11, they remain at ACE and complete their examinations. This report, that actually feeds in as well to the question I think that was asked earlier. I think by Councillor Simpson, in fact, is that you're talking there about a very small number, and therefore there's the issue of being able to identify who those children might be. This report sets out how well children who attend ACE perform, spanning factors from attendance to the academic outcomes those who attended for a longer period of time achieve. The report also considers the impact of rising levels of permanent exclusions, both locally and also nationally, and the measures taken by Plymouth City Council and partners to ensure that children receive high quality Day 6 provision and transition back into school as quickly as possible against the challenging context, because getting those children and having a plan of getting those children as quickly as possible back into schools is really the ideal solution. Finally, this report considers next steps for developing the provision at ACE so that children who attend receive a further enhanced multidisciplinary offer so that their needs can be understood and met quickly. This approach, the Development and Alternative Provision Specialist Task Force, will further support good planning and outcomes for children who have been permanently excluded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Creswell. I'm going to be bold and ask my question first, if that's okay. So, it's a passion of mine, isn't it? And I worry that Councillor Simpson's question about the no assessment was on primary, wasn't it? So I'm wondering, I know that when we get to 16, those students at ACE, there's no further education within ACE. They then go on to potentially the college and such, and so eyes on are probably harder to achieve at that point. And I just, having been in this setting, having worked in this setting, and having worked with the staff that work in this setting that invest a lot of time into these pupils and how they feel with that move on, I just wonder if there's any kind of plan or thought or anything that we can maybe think about doing to make that more seamless. Because, and I will say anecdotally, a staff member who stated the person had left the school and she tried to catch up with her to see how things were going, and she could never get a hold of her, she couldn't find her, she's never seen her since. And I just think, is there anything in that sense to make sure these young people who are vulnerable are getting what they need?
Thank
Lisa,
you.
thank you.
So The first thing is that the transition strand in place-based includes transitions into post-16, and we have representation in the place-based working from our colleges, which is really positive. Secondly, and probably more importantly in terms of the assurance, we now have termly monitoring visits in place with the colleges to look specifically at vulnerable cohorts of children and young people. So they're young people by then, aren't they? Cohorts of young people to ensure that they are attending well and making good progress. They've got enough of the right diet, educational diet in front of them, and that they are attending well as part of that. So it's a really positive addition that we've made in the last term. So City College had their monitoring just this term just gone.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And I do know there's lots of work going on here. I just like to keep it up. Any questions from the Councillor Creswell?
Could I just add something? If you look at the appendix, which are strands of the place-based plan for 24-25, item 6 there is building a pre-16 offer, which is, as we've mentioned, is in collaboration with City College Plymouth. But also as well, we've been doing and having some success with our young people who, you know, there probably is quite often some crossover here with our young people who are likely to be NEET, but in fact we're calling them SEAT, and those children who are not in education, employment and training, and a lot of really supportive work is actually going on, a lot of one-to-one work going on with our children, which very often who might have a special educational and healthcare plan, and also have had and found, you know, certain challenges, and we've got some really good work that's actually going on, one-to-one work, in order to encourage those young people and get those people into post-16 training and education. But also building that pre-16 offer is actually really important as well, because we want to actually keep children as much as possible in school.
Thank you very much, Councillor Creswell. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. It's also on the appendix, so I'm at paragraph 5, so just above where we were a second ago. It's about vaping, and the final sentence states that we intend to build on the existing work in the city around vaping by seeking to enhance the proactive support and offer to schools to reduce the number of young people using vapes. I've read enough reports to know that's a slight amount of waffle, so can we have some specifics on what we're actually intending to do, please?
Thank you, Jim.
Yes, the vaping strategy in the city is led by Public Health, one of our public health officers. What we have is a offer for schools through SHARP, which is the service for drug and alcohol use in Plymouth, and they are working directly with schools to put on workshops with children and young people to support children and young people, address vaping and to reduce really the number of children that are vaping, because we know it's a problem not just in the city but nationally. So that's the programme that we have in place, and we will continue that work through the place-based plan, because one of the key things is to address the issue across the phases of school, from primary through to secondary, to ensure that we get the messaging right for children, families and young people as they come through the school system.
I think it's also worth noting that since that work has been in place, there have not been any permanent exclusions in relation to drug-related vaping.
Councillor Creswell, could you take me?
No, that's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say.
Can I come back?
Councillor Wood.
Thank you. So beyond just workshops, are we proactively taking vapes and stuff off children in schools if they're found with them?
All schools, through their behaviour policies or relationship policies, will have specific ways with dealing with vapes on school premises. One of the issues that we saw in previous academic years was a spike in permanent exclusions for the reasons of vaping. However, with the work that we've done through public health, what we're seeing is that number is now reduced, because schools and school leaders are finding ways of working with young people, working with families to prevent vaping and prevent it on school premises.
Thank you.
yes, largely speaking, if vapes are found in schools, they're confiscated. You know, it's very straightforward.
Thank you, Jim. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. Forgive me if it's included, I can't find it, but what's the opportunities for children leaving an alternative provision to go back to a mainstream school? And what, you know, obviously every individual is different, but what tends to contribute to that opportunity?
We have arrangements in place for children who are stepping down out of alternative provision back into mainstream school, and they're managed through our Fair Access panel, which is a partnership between the local authority and Plymouth schools. So we work across all secondary schools, as an example, and primary schools, once a month to review children who are ready to make that step back into mainstream. And if they've been in ACE, then they will be supported by ACE, who will work in partnership with the school to make that transition as seamless as possible. In addition, when children are permanently excluded and need to go into ACE, parents are supported to apply for a new mainstream school, so that we are supporting the parents and the child always to kind of keep that return in mind, so that they know what they're working towards. So those arrangements are there and they're strong in terms of that support for children to step back down into mainstream education.
Thank you very
And
much.
a separate, presumably they go to a different school because of history, is that best?
Yes, if they've been permanently excluded, they don't return to their school.
Thank you, Isabel. Councillor Nay.
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to touch on what Councillor Wood said about the vape situation. And our current government, our present government, is looking at banning single-use vapes in June, which will be a good thing. But actually, when people are caught or reprimanded for vaping, is there any education plan in the system to teach them about how it's wrong for them and, you know, what they could do instead of vaping, or to wean themselves off vaping, things like that? Thank you.
Yes, so through our public health programme, all of those elements are covered in terms of messages to young people around how they can, stop in very similar ways to other harmful substances, particularly, those things are very much at the forefront of the programme.
Sorry, Chair, just one more quick question. Are people actually nowadays given a detention for things like that? Would that be a good way to educate them at detention, that the dangers of vaping? Thank you.
Schools and trusts will have behaviour policies in place, and they will take action related to the circumstances that they find individual young people in, because actually those circumstances can be varied or different, and therefore the response to that will be proportionate. So, for example, it may be perfectly appropriate that a young person was put into a detention for vaping based on the circumstances under which they had that vape or were found vaping. Equally, it may be equally as proportionate and appropriate to have a different response. So school leaders do have that flexibility under their policies to take action which is directly related to the circumstances of the young person.
Is that okay? Are there no further questions? Okay, so we were due to have a break after the next item, but if you don't mind, as you've noticed, I've put my sunglasses on. I'm going to go and need to take some tablets. If that's okay, we have our 5-minute break now, and come back at 12:20, if that's okay. Thank you. I'm keen to get back on, so we're starting a bit later than I had said. Moving on to item 8, Q2 2024-25 Children, Young People and Families EPS Performance Report. Please can I hand over to Susan London and Paul Stevens to introduce the report.
Good afternoon. So report you've got in front of you is for Q2, looking at July through to September, so reasonably up to date for this scrutiny. Following last scrutiny, I've made some additions to the report, so you'll find Annex 2 gives some links to those alternative or better sources of published data. So if you want to look at more historical information, it gives you 3 different sources in there to be able to go and look at quite a large range of council indicators that have been published through the DFE or different organisations. Okay, so there's links in there as well, which should hopefully take you straight through to that site. The other thing is we're hoping by the end of December we'll have the benchmarking information for year 23-24 for children's social care information. So the next quarter we'll hopefully have more up-to-date benchmarking for that. Just speaking to Sue a little bit earlier, education's not quite as easy as that because they release information in stages. So again, the benchmarking will be a bit hit and miss on what period it's showing, but we will try and give you the most up-to-date benchmarking when it becomes available. Again, the report has the same indicators that we've had throughout the year so far, and we just have that narrative from a performance point of view, whether it's gone up or down, but then also some service narrative in there as well for you. Vivian, I don't know if you've got anything to add, or we just open up to questions.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
We open straight up to questions. Do you know what? I can't read that. I am going to. Would you like a question? Councillor Wood, I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Question is, do all the children who require one have an up-to-date EHCP?
No, not at this point. So we still are in a position where we are working through an assessment backlog. We've been making rapid progress through that backlog. We've had additional staffing brought into the team, and there's further staffing coming on board in January. It does mean now that we are hitting our deadlines for 6-week assessments really, really well. And we are significantly improved on our timescales for moving through to the 20-week writing of the plans. But though that full backlog of those plans, the trajectory is that they will be completed by October next year, and that includes in that trajectory any new assessments for plans coming in.
Councillor Wood?
And obviously that is scrutinised very closely by the independently chaired Send Improvement Board, who receive a monthly report on all of the detail that sits within that and how we're progressing with those trajectories. They feel assured in terms of that progress so far.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you. It's not unique to this council. I know South Gloucestershire, we had a huge backlog as well. So can I just make sure I understood that correctly? By October of next year, we'll be up to date. There'll be none outstanding on current trajectories.
That's correct.
That's great news. Can I just quickly ask while I'm still in the room? Page 37, the targeted early help requiring social work intervention, started to see volume referral and subsequent assessments. It's really good news. And I've been thinking a lot about the good news stories that come to corporate parenting, about placing young people back with families or with other parents. And I just wondered how we might achieve more of those families staying together moving forward. Jemima?
I know it's a kind of shift, isn't it? And I think Vivian will probably pick this up about asking tasking social workers to be more thoughtful about how you can do that work differently and what support might need to be put in place to not have to take those, you know, more stringent steps around bringing children into care. And we're looking at our kinship carer work, and again, that can support a family when they're going through a crisis, not necessarily bringing children into care so they have to go into foster care, but so that a family or close family friends can step up. And there's been an announcement as well in the budget about the kinship carer allowance and the pilot, and I know that Plymouth has applied, or whatever the right word is, to take part in that pilot to see whether offering, I think it's offering more or less the same allowance would increase the number of people who would step in to become kinship carers. And that's another way of heading off some of that stuff if people can step into that space to support families in those times of crisis. I don't know when we know whether we're in that pilot or not, but I think it would be great. I've got fingers crossed that we can be part of that work, because we're really looking to develop that part of the service. But Vivian can give you more detail about the kind of early help work.
Thank you, Jemima. Vivian.
Thank you, councillors. Absolutely, that work to build families' capacities and help them to identify the resources that already exist within their own family community and how that can be better utilised to support families to prevent problems from escalating is a priority for us. And we're currently training or supporting staff to make sure they use family network meetings routinely as part of every intervention early with families. So we get neighbours, aunts, uncles, grandparents together with the family to understand the problem or the need and how everybody can be supporting with that to prevent things from deteriorating. And those are, you know, really having an impact. That strengths-based way of working is really effective. The other thing that I would add is we do still have a lot more to do with our early help partners to build the capacity in the system to support families at that early stage. So we've got some pilots developing in Stonehouse where we're looking at how we bring partners together to offer a more integrated model of early help delivery early in the life of problems to meet families' needs. We're really hopeful about the capacity and the potential to develop more approaches like that across the city, so that we prevent problems and prevent the need for the more intensive, intrusive statutory interventions later in life. So hopefully that's helpful.
That was amazing, and it's really, I get a lot of people talking to me about early help, and it's really refreshing to know that all of those outside bodies as well wanting to be involved in that kind of approach is incredible. Kind of a little bit of a tie-in to that early help situation is when we look at page 38 and we're looking at the neglect and the emotional abuse of children. And then if we go on then to page 39, where it says part of our improvement journey, we're equipping social workers with better understanding of identification for sexual abuse and domestic abuse. I kind of wonder if we're also looking at what is causing neglect and emotional abuse, because obviously they can be, as a part of domestic abuse, probably runs through lots of trauma that we deal with. And I wonder if there's sexual abuse, physical abuse is intent to cause harm, whereas neglect and emotional abuse there could be other factors at play. And so are we looking at those things as well? So, you know, deprivation, cost of living, all of those things that could make it seem that a parent is neglecting their child when actually there's not really very much that they can do to help their child. Does that make sense? Vivian?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Those contextual factors are absolutely at the heart of the work that our targeted help model is developing, and our conversations with partners around early help. So our family support workers working with families to make sure they're maximising their income, take it, their benefit take up, that their housing situation is stable, that we're thinking about those day-to-day factors that may well impact on the care that they're able to give their children. But also, of course, recognising substance misuse, parental mental health, are really key determinants of both neglect and physical abuse in the case of alcohol misuse. And so working with partners to make sure that we've got the right interventions for families and supporting families to access those interventions early. So very, very much seeing that broad, wider context to those situations.
Thank you very much, Vivian. That's, of course.
And I think there's a job to do about not assuming, even as counsellors, I think, that everybody knows about everything that's available. I spoke to a resident the other day who didn't know about the uniform store in town, for instance. I mean, I'm not saying that's going to have a massive impact on neglect, but just to say, and I was kind of surprised that she didn't know about it, but it was a good learning point for me, because I thought, well, just because I know about it, and lots of people I know about it, we still have a job to do all the time to signpost people to all kinds of support, whether it's the uniform store or more, you know, serious long-term support. I guess it's a thing around just not assuming that people know and have tried things. We just, and actually I think we did an audit together, Vivian, didn't we? And something came up that a social worker didn't know about one particular, you know, fairly new thing in Plymouth. And so that's a communication with children's services as well as people who need our service.
Vivian.
Just following on from that, we Targeted Help Service recently organised a marketplace for professionals across the city to come together and learn more about what services are available from the community, voluntary sector, as well as statutory agencies. There was a fantastic attendance of stall holders promoting their service, and a really great attendance from partners, social workers, to learn more, and we're going to hold those more regularly. We know websites are important and we need to keep information up to date, but those relationships and face-to-face opportunities are also really valuable. And just to come back to that earlier point, integrating professionals more in locality ways of working around the city, as we're starting to do with our early help model and we'll look at in other areas, is another opportunity to make sure people draw together different disciplines, different expertise, different knowledge to support families in the way that they need.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lang.
We both went to that, Councillor Creswell and I, and it was such a good event, and there were people who are steeped in this work who didn't know about that organisation over there or that organisation over there. And as Vivian said, there's going to be more of those for professionals, but also we're working on a version for families, so that they can come along to wherever it's going to be, some kind of central location, hopefully, and they can come along and see all the stuff that's happening in the city. And there is a great deal of it. But I was struck at that event. It was brilliant. It was brilliantly well attended. But so many people are like, well, I didn't know that existed, and I didn't know that existed, and they work in this world. So it's just a reminder, I think.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Just add a bit of clarity around the classifications we've got in here, because I think Vivian sort of covered it off there. The 4 classifications we've got on the child protection plans there, the neglect, the physical, sexual, emotional abuse, those are aligned with the DFE classifications. But in the assessments that our social workers will do, they'll be considering every factor. So it will, you know, they'll look at everything. It's just that the most prevalent factor will be what the code's used for there, just in case anyone wasn't sure.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, I just have something. Oh, Councillor Stevens, go on.
Sorry, can I just say the report is far more informative than previous reports, where I found that whilst there were tables with data there, you just have those tables translated into the words for those numbers underneath. But there's a lot more now what's happening and so what and what difference it makes. And there seem to be more betters there. I've got a couple of questions. You say about the MASH, you're trying to involve more partner agencies in the MASH hub. What type of partner agencies do you feel would enhance the work you're doing?
So we've got homelessness just recently in there, so that's really good expertise. More support around domestic violence, substance misuse. There are a range of professionals who aren't directly there, where the notion of kind of getting the right help to families quickly without the need for them to progress further through process is a real opportunity for us. So building that kind of expertise into that central hub to help with thinking and decision making at that first point of contact.
Just to add to that, so one of the additional areas that are supporting the MASH now is the probation service. So there's a member of the probation service in that MASH team every week now. I think it's 1 day a week at the minute, but they're there.
Thank you. And with the increase in re-referrals, it made me think, with staffing change and so on, is it a good idea? Is it applicable sometimes for the same social worker to attach to a family for when there's a repeat? Or is there a necessity sometimes to change? Or is it possible to have the same one, given that the social worker might have left?
It's a really good question. We really reinforce relationship-based practice. That's really important to us, and it's really important to families that they're able to build a relationship with the professional. Everything tells us that you're more likely to engage and make change if you have a strong relationship with your professional that's working with you. We have had challenges in achieving that when we've had turbulence in our workforce, and we've still got recruitment and challenges. However, you're absolutely right. There are also some circumstances when it's a positive thing for a family to have a change of social worker and a new, fresh pair of eyes on a situation. And it will always be something that the manager is thinking about. When families come back to us quickly after a previous piece of intervention, they do return to the same team. We don't expect them to go all the way back through the front door. They can come in the side door, if you like, and straight back to the team that they were with, so that we don't repeat things and we have a good view of the previous history and the intervention. But the manager will always be thinking about, is it going to be a good thing for the family to have the same worker if we can achieve that, or will it not be? Should we start again? So it's careful considerations to each individual circumstance.
Thank you very much. Lisa?
I just wanted to pick up on the thank you because as part of our One Children's Services 3-year strategic plan, we have a focus on how we as leaders across our service and as practitioners across the service can utilise our data better, understand it better and make more regular use of it. And I think that's why you're now seeing that coming through in the quality of the information and not just the data at the underneath the data table. So it's lovely that we'll be able to feed that back to our managers and our heads of service, that's being felt back here.
Thank you very much. Before we move on, I would just like to, while I have this platform, say a couple of things. First and foremost is domestic violence term suggests that there's only violence involved, and domestic abuse is the term that we need to be using because there's so much more involved in it, especially where young people and children are concerned. But also, I wanted to sort of say that with regards to children and young people in this arena, we have abusive parents and non-abusive parents, and we assume when the abusive parent has left the home, the abused parent is then okay to take up the role of parenting the child and that's not just authority, that is across the board organisations, and is then under scrutiny as to how they take care of that child. So I just wanted to make sure, it's not a question, I just wanted to use my voice to be able to say for all those people that might be listening that we are paying attention to that as an issue. Thank you. Moving on to item 9, Children and Young People and Family Service Quarterly Improvement Update. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Susan. Please can I hand over to Councillor Lang to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. The Children and Young People Family Service Improvement Plan has been in place since the inspection of the local authority's children's services in January this year, and progress has been overseen by the Plymouth Children's Improvement Board, put in place as part of the statutory intervention following the focus visit in December 2022. Following the improvements noted by our improvement partner and the DFE, the intervention notice was lifted earlier in the year, which is very good news. But partners have agreed to continue to meet as an improvement board to ensure that progress is being maintained. I'm really pleased to note in this latest quarterly update report that progress continues to be made in key areas, in particular in the out-of-hours service, the local authority designated officer arrangements, and the response to unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. These areas were all identified by Ofsted as in need of improvement, and the remedial work has progressed well, so much so that Dorset, our sector-led improvement partner, was able to confirm to the board in September that good progress has been made. The report confirms that the improvements to the front door are being sustained, and the refocusing of our targeted help services is having a positive impact on more families receiving earlier help. However, there is more to do to further strengthen the front door to children's services, improving the journey of children and families from needing to receiving help. I'm also really pleased to see the improved timeliness of the completion of assessments, the workforce development that is happening to ensure that they are all quite high quality. In addition, maintaining caseloads within acceptable range is a key part of enabling social workers to complete consistently high quality practice. This includes with our children in care to ensure that they all have high quality plans which are progressing well. The progress review provides good evidence from quality assurance work, and as I said, I was pleased to have the opportunity to complete a practice audit alongside a social worker in October with Vivian, and to see how these are helping to inform practice improvements. And of course, there continue to be challenges. There's always going to be more to do, but the report notes the planned work that is in place in priority areas going forward, including in response to challenges recruiting experienced social workers and in developing the skills and confidence of our managers and leaders to deliver consistently good outcomes for every child and young person. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lang. It's always really good to be involved in Practice Week, and I know an email went out very recently about such. There's also Lunch and Learn, isn't there, again this time? So that's always really good because you can do that anywhere online. Would anybody have any questions? Councillor Rainsford.
Thank you. Page 53, the rate of referral has increased, jumped quite a lot. Wondered whether you were able to break that down. Were there any themes in the reasoning for those re-referrals?
Yes. Absolutely. We have looked very closely at the cohort of families that are coming back to us each month to really understand why that is. And the biggest theme is that we are now getting our pathway between our statutory social work and our targeted help really working effectively, so that when families don't need a social worker, they are smoothly getting that support from the targeted help service. But what's not working so well is then, once they no longer need that level of support, stepping those families back to more universal or earlier help services. So that they then we close the case thinking they're going to go to a family hub or they're going to go and access this community resource, but they then don't. And so a couple of months' time, things deteriorate again, and a school is referring that family back in again. So it's that real conversation about how we sustain change over a longer period of time. We can't have social workers in every family forever, but we do need to be confident that that family are going to be supported in the longer term, because often problems, or challenges, they need to be supported over a longer period of time. So how we use our family hubs, our relationships with schools, universal health services, those are really key to us. So social workers at the moment are really making sure that whenever they have a plan in place with a family, those universal professionals are involved from the very beginning, so that because they will stay involved afterwards, and that they understand what the family's needs are, and they understand what their role is going to be in supporting that family. But also the other thing I would say is that conversation we had earlier about building families' capacities within their own networks, grandmas, aunties, uncles, neighbours. That's really, really important to us as well in sustaining change and supporting families over the longer term. And we haven't always been good enough at making sure everybody understands what the family's going to need and how they can all help over the months ahead, particularly when social workers are no longer involved. So yeah.
Can I, sorry, before Councillor Lang comes in, can I ask whether or not the marketplace idea that you had in terms of surprising people about all the things that are out there to support them, the idea that you were thinking about doing one for families seems to fit into that narrative. So that's encouraging.
And I think, at the risk of sounding like we're repeating ourselves, everything goes back, not everything, a lot of things go back to early help, either having early help at the beginning or when families are deemed no longer to need that kind of intervention to properly sort of signpost the pathway. And I think it's helpful, my introduction is very positive because for people who haven't been on this committee for a long time, then you won't be aware of where we were as a service and how far we've come. But that's not to say we haven't still got a long way to go. But I think it's really helpful that we can look at this re-referral now and go, well, actually, we can see why this is happening in large part. So we've got a plan to work out how to deal with it. And it just feels to me that there are bits where we can look at the service and go, well, that's not working how we thought it was going to, what's wrong? And we are able to come up with, plans quite quickly that are identifying where we're not doing things in the way that is helpful for families. And I think the signposting thing again is another big thing that we need to get right. And I think, that the version for families that we're working on, I think that will be a big part of it, but it's a many-pronged thing, isn't it? How you, and not just in children's social care, and every bit of what the council does, how you let people know what's available for them. But I think, it's disappointing, but I feel reassured that we know what we need to do and we have a plan to tackle it.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Thank you. Councillor Stevens.
Quick one. Has the ladder been appointed?
Yes.
That's great. But we're not allowed to know who it is yet.
I haven't formally had it,
That's
but
fair enough.
the incumbent was successful permanently. So that's hopefully that's not breaching any process.
I don't know if
but
it's
it was
helpful.
Good news for us.
I don't know if it's helpful to explain their role a bit, maybe for.
Yeah. So our local authority designated officer is responsible for ensuring that all allegations against professionals across all organisations are handled effectively. So volunteers, teachers, police officers, wherever there is an allegation of some kind of misconduct involving a child, the local authority designated officer ensures that it's thoroughly investigated and that the right HR processes are being followed in depending on the organisation, so that children are safeguarded going forward.
And it's important that we've got this right now because it was something that was raised with us by Ofsted.
And the LADO has recently done refresher guidance on exactly their role with education staff in the local authority, so that we can be assured that they know what to do and who to go to should they have a concern.
Any further questions? Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. You highlighted earlier unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. How many are there in a local authority area?
Yeah, I think it might be 18 now. We had a new unaccompanied asylum-seeking child arrive at the end of last week. So I think, but I will double check and get the exact number to you. Our numbers are very low compared to the formula that we would be expected to receive given our child population level. But so we're always braced for an influx because we could be prioritised for a high number of arrivals should it be needed, given we have low numbers. But we are doing really well now, finding suitable arrangements for those young people when they arrive with us, and finding foster placements immediately. And we've got much better arrangements in place to meet those young people's cultural and emotional needs once they do arrive with us. So they now, there are 2 dedicated workers who respond to those young people's needs immediately. They come to our attention and stay with them. And we've got really good commitment from partners to meeting those young people's needs appropriately, from health partners and our virtual school in particular. So really low numbers, but a good response at the moment.
Thank you very much, Vivian. Any further questions? I would just, if it's okay, could you explain what you would deem a non-statutory service?
So, they're walking through the door. These are our non-statutory services, actually. They look like that. They're basically services that we're not required by law to have. So there is legislation that requires us to have social workers in place, for example, to undertake investigations and to operate within the context of the Children Act to keep children safe. We're not required by law to have early help services or targeted help services, but you'd be foolish not to, in my opinion. But that's an opinion. But it's up to the council to choose to invest in those areas as part of its wider offer to children and families.
So one would suggest we're going above what is required here, and it's good news. We're doing well here. My other question is around about the values and behaviours framework. I just wonder, what does that look like? And in the same, in this framework, are we also celebrating staff and employees?
Yeah, very much. So our values and behaviours framework it's a bit hot off the press. It's in final draft. It's being socialised with managers and staff across the service currently. It's been designed but in partnership with staff. We started the development of it through the work that we did on our 3-year plan, where we talked to staff about high expectations, high support and high challenge. The ethos, the philosophy that we want to underpin the way that we work, we wanted to underpin our plan. And staff were very comfortable and supportive of those aspirations, but really wanted to have more detail about what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of how we behave as leaders, as managers, and what does that mean in terms of what we expect of all of our staff across all of our teams? So we've worked through all staff engagement events that we have each quarter to develop that up into a set of behaviours under high expectations, high support and high challenge. And those behaviours are described both for kind of operational staff, but also for managers and leaders. And so they talk about the kinds of behaviours that we would expect to see day to day in terms of respecting each other, supporting each other, how we help each other all to be high achieving, how we reward good practice, how we support risk taking and innovation. We're focused on learning. We are currently talking about that framework in our team and service meetings, and teams are starting to think about, we're just starting that work, what do they need to do differently to take those behaviours forward, to embed those behaviours in their teams and services, and that's very much both a top down and a bottom up kind of communication conversation that delivers those going forward.
Thank you very much, Vivian. If there are no further questions, I'll move on to item 10. Item 10, child exploitation and the Philomena Protocol. Please can I hand over to Councillor Lang to introduce the report. Can I also welcome PC Danny Albany to the panel, who will be in support with Martine Aquilina. And can I just say that there will be a briefing on child exploitation on the 3rd of December for members. Thank you.
Thank you. As with all cities, the nature and scope of child exploitation in Plymouth is changing rapidly. Currently, we have 17 active drug lines coming into the city for organised crime groups, and these criminals often target children's vulnerabilities to exploit and criminalise them. So over the past 2 years, the team have worked closely with the child-centred policing team and made great strides in terms of identifying children at risk of sexual and physical exploitation and offering these children interventions as well as targeting the adults who perpetrate these crimes. This paper sets out the current position relating to child exploitation within the context of wider extrafamilial harm definition, including the progress made in implementing a contextual safeguarding approach through the Adolescent Safety Framework and the work of the Be Safe team to intervene with children at risk. The paper also provides an update on the Philomena Protocol. The Philomena Protocol is a police initiative to help locate and safely return a young person as quickly as possible when they are missing. The basis of the scheme is for vital information about the young person to be recorded on forms which can be used to locate them safely and quickly. Carers, guardians and parents are encouraged to complete the form with as much detail as possible, then keep it somewhere safe, along with a recent photograph. The form needs to be regularly updated with new information on description, friends, associates, locations frequented, phone numbers and identifiers to maximise the opportunity for the young person to be found swiftly and safely. That way, if a young person does go missing, the police receive all the information they need to start the search straight away. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lang. Can I just say before we move on, I'd like to introduce Naomi. Sorry, Naomi, I didn't have you on my sheet here, so it's really lovely to have you here from the Youth Justice Service. Are there any questions for Councillor Stephen?
It's a really interesting read for all the odd sort of reasons you can imagine. But is there a correlation between children who have become involved in the criminal justice system and who might have had a previous safeguarding concern raised? Is background indicative of some of the circumstances young people find themselves in terms of child protection and so on?
Thank you. So I'm Naomi Sutton, I'm Team Manager for Be Safe, which is now part of the Youth Justice Service. So what we know from broader research across the country is that children who are known to the Youth Justice Service are more likely to have experienced adversity, adverse childhood experiences, and more likely to be known to children's social care. Specifically in relation to Be Safe, so my team responds specifically to children who are reported as missing and at risk of exploitation. I would say between 60 to 75% of the children that we respond to are already known to children's social care. I don't know about specific data for youth justice children, but I would say it's probably a similar cohort.
And follow up to that then, are there flags put up for when young people are being, have a plan because they've been subjected to or committed certain behaviours, flagged up because they are at higher risk of being involved in child exploitation? And how is that monitored, please?
Sorry, do you mean flags for a child that's already open to children's social care and under a child in need or child protection plan?
Not yet identified as being subject to child exploitation,
okay,
but is at risk. And how are those risks and flags managed?
And this morning we've been here today purely renewing our training around our adolescent safety framework, and that is the framework where it gives us the ability to look at indicators and vulnerabilities that are associated with young people being at risk of exploitation. So alongside a single assessment, if a child or an adolescent is starting to show some of those indicators in that guide, that is the way that the social worker will then start to understand whether this child is at significant risk or at risk of becoming exploited. So that gives them the tool to start really understanding whether or not these particular children. So for example, if a child's not in school on a regular basis, they're starting to go missing but not being regularly missing, all of those things would be indicators for us to start probably wondering about, is there something else going on for this child? And the tool assists with that, the ability for a social worker to start to pick that up, and also partners. So our education partners will be rolling out training for them so that they can start to think,
is this child coming in and presenting differently? And is that a flag for us to start talking to our social care colleagues to think about what risk this child is at? So in that respect, yes, that we've got a specific tool that helps us to be curious about whether there's exploitation. You know, exploitation is a feature for that child.
I would just add to that, for every single new child who's reported as missing, alongside our return home conversations, which we offer and aim to deliver within 72 hours of the child returning home, we also complete a CE screen, which is kind of, so the Safe for Me assessment is, if you like, the full assessment of risk around contextual risk and exploitation. For every child who's reported as missing, even if it's once, we'll complete a shorter kind of screening tool, which helps us to pick out those key indicators and vulnerabilities. That helps us, I think, with what you're kind of talking about in terms of that earlier indication, and identifying which children we need to track and understand if there's changes to that risk.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rainsford.
Thank you. I'm interested in the police role in this. We all as adults walk around the streets and we see young people and we sort of wonder why they aren't in school or what they're up to. But it's not something we can easily necessarily approach ourselves. Policing at the moment, we've got this hotspot policing where we've got officers specifically walking the beat. What's their role? Were they to see young people who they were wondering why they were on the streets? Would they be obliged, would they have to approach them and find out what they were doing there? And if they do and they take names, are those names fed into any other body so that we can track that these young people perhaps aren't necessarily missing because the police officer's seen them and had a conversation? I mean, how does that work?
Thank you. Yeah, so officers will engage with young people out on the street, and then we complete what we call PPNs, and that is like a safeguarding form which highlights any concerns, which is then shared with school, health, social services. Yeah, so we have a lot of information sharing. Our team work really closely with the Be Safe team. We have a daily intelligence briefing where we discuss any young children that have been missing or at risk of exploitation as well. And then we look at what we can do in partnership to help disrupt those missing episodes and that exploitation, whether that's joint visits or offering intervention. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rainsford. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. I have quite a difficult question. It's reported that Shia Muslim parties in Iraq are seeking to lower the age of consent from 18 to 19. The second reading of the amendment to Law 188 was passed by their parliament in September. It is further reported that their governing coalition says the move aligns with a strict interpretation of Islamic law. So how are we protecting girls in Plymouth from people who may share such an interpretation? So you'll appreciate why it's a difficult and sensitive question to ask, noting what has happened elsewhere in the country at different times. So how are we specifically protecting people in these circumstances?
Can I just come in on that just a moment, because that's a law in another country and not here. But I will let you answer that. Thank you, and I can understand sometimes we need to have these difficult conversations. I think from the perspective of myself and from the police, we work really actively to identify any adult that poses a risk or concern to the children that we're working with, and that does sometimes involve some difficult conversations. An example of that is some of our care experienced young people who are only just adults themselves and may be engaging with our children in the community, and there may be elements of risk in that contact for both the child and the vulnerable young adult. And I think what we have to do is we have to consider the risk to the child, the vulnerabilities around that particular adult, and think objectively about how we mitigate the risk and try to remove concepts of blame, shame, spotlighting particular adults, and think more about what is the risk to our child and how do we mitigate that. And that might involve processes within the daily intelligence briefing where we share that information carefully,
but proportionately, and respond to that accordingly with different methods of disruption, either led by the police or through more kind of supportive engagement from my service. We may also look at broader or bigger operations that would be more directed by police. And we have had to engage with certain different population groups, not necessarily just from the country that you're referring to, but we have had to engage with those things, and we do have to consider those cultural differences. But I think the main thing is about identifying objectively and without emotion, what is the risk to that child and how do we reduce that?
Thank you very much. I think I'd like to state that it's really important that we check all vulnerable children against all perpetrating adults and people in general, because I think we could probably find a risk factor in absolutely every demographic we look at. So I'd just like that on the record, please. I have a question myself, Danny, if that's okay. How have you been perceived? How have you been kind of accepted with the Philomena protocol is very good. It looks very good. How is that going? How is it working for you?
So, like all new processes, there's been a few difficulties in embedding the Philomena protocol. It's an ongoing piece of work, and we expected that there may be some difficulties because it's getting everyone used to the protocol. So that is ongoing, and we are working very hard to make sure that that is embedded, and that I think the expectation is that the majority of all looked after children will eventually have a Philomena protocol, because it talks about not just missing episodes, but that risk of going missing and that exploitation risk. So that is the hope, and I know we're working really hard with partners to make sure that's embedded really well.
I guess I'm just kind of working in this area. I get excited when we see new projects and new pilots that are going to help with this sort of thing, and I just wonder how you feel about it as being someone who delivers this kind of thing. So if you have that level of excitement, I know how important the work is, kind of.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an amazing tool. It's already used really successfully in several police forces around the country. It's not just exclusive to Devon and Cornwall. So there's lots of learning to be done, and I think it's all about reducing the risk of exploitation and helping those young people. So I think it's a really positive protocol. So yeah, it's very exciting.
I do particularly like the first bit of it where it says you have a way of knowing what the child prefers to wear and the places the child prefers to be. And I find specifically working with young people in trauma situations with ACEs and such, it's hard to get that kind of joined up approach around a child because of GDPR and confidentiality. So it's really good that something like that is in place. I'm really happy about that. Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Sorry.
Councillor McLean.
Quick one, thank you. It's kind of concerning to read about the rise in violence amongst young women, and I'm just wondering, you mentioned that there might be peer pressure amongst that. What are the other driving factors behind that increase, because it is quite significant?
In terms of violence towards women?
The violence against young people's violence.
Yeah, so young people are engaging in violent crime. We know that. We work really hard to try and reduce and disrupt that. Women are vulnerable. I think so. The impact of social media, the access to violent pornography is readily available. I think that's all impact factors. But police and partners, we take that really seriously, and we aim to reduce that and empower young women.
And just to come in on that as well, I think what we've accepted between myself and my manager, Ian Taylor, who's service manager for youth justice, is that very often a child who is presenting with violent or aggressive behaviours, or a child who's engaging with antisocial behaviours, is very often either already involved with exploitation and being targeted by particular people, or at high risk of exploitation. So I think a key part, whether we're talking about girls or boys, is about looking holistically at the child's situation, rather than focusing in on a specific behaviour such as violence or antisocial behaviour, but looking at their whole world, their whole lived experience. What is the unmet need that's driving those presentations and behaviours? How we address them will then direct and hopefully reduce those other concerns.
Councillor McClay, just to reassure you that female violence is on our schedule for a future date. Thank you. No further questions on this? So we do have a briefing on this on the 3rd of December. So you have this report to have a little bit more of an in-depth look at if you think of anything you might want to raise when you get there. That'd be amazing, thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today. It was really good to meet you. And I am absolutely open to having a conversation outside of the room. Thank you. Thank you, Martine, as well, as always. Moving on to item 11, tracking decisions. Members are asked to note this log. Do I need a vote? No. Vote. And then on to the work programme.
Can I make through you, Chair, a suggestion? Picking up what Councillor Wood said earlier on, when we were looking at the data, the performance data for children, would it be useful to the panel to have a presentation by the Plymouth School Sports Partnership, who provide a lot of sporting activities for physical activity, as well as sport and leadership opportunities across the city schools, including in the early years? Is that appropriate to come to this panel?
So you've fallen into the trap that I always fall into. This is health and adult social care. We can make a recommendation, and we have put in a form for a select committee, which potentially we could discuss this there, but maybe it's a discussion we have at Scrutiny Management Board. Is that okay? Is that noted?
Through you, Chair, do you want to make that recommendation formal to the Scrutiny Management Board to look at that?
I'd be happy to. If it's supported by panel members?
Yeah, can I just get a quick vote then, please?
Very much. Councillor Lang.
It's not really my job to suggest things, but actually I think it would be good to bring the family homes for Plymouth children work back to the next, because we'll hopefully have made some real advances around the residential provision plan and things like that. So if it's all right for me to suggest that.
No, that's perfect. And also, I know that the foster video, I know it goes to corporate parenting, but it would be really lovely if we could just see that here too, because we have touched on foster in here, and it's such a. Has everyone seen that video? No.
Yes.
Oh, okay. It's special. There was something I noted. My head is not. It was the data, the education attainment data that was very early data. If we could have a more up-to-date, just a to-note report would be fine. I don't. Oh, we can take it offline then. That's fine. And have a discussion. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining today. We were early. This never happens, does it? Oh, sorry, Councillor Wood.
So just through you, Chair, for us 6th of February meeting, we only have one item currently scheduled. Do we need to schedule the other items in there?
Yeah, so we'll do that in our agenda setting meeting. Thank you very much. I do apologise for my not quite being here today. See you again next time. Thank you.